Alright, so as I attempt to catch back up on 2019 movies after I feel like I missed quite a few during the award season and all that, I figured we could shake it up just a little bit. I don't know that I've done the whole verses for a movie that's still in theaters thing or not, but we'll see how this goes. And I figure why not, since it would be one of those cases where whenever I talk about the new movie, there's the whole, I'd probably mostly be comparing it to the old movie anyway, so yeah, so there's going to be this, and then just next, like a whole video that's got like 8 or 9 movies on it, so I figured I would just separate this. And it gives us an excuse to talk about What Women Want, to see exactly where the new one might be coming from and why they felt it was necessary. So, with an introduction of this new movie, I kind of figured, especially with, the climate the way it is now, my thought was, so is What Women Want seen as like this really misogynistic movie now, or something? I mean, obviously you can see that because of the main character, but I mean, is it, something really, really terrible that I just forgot about that might be totally dated at this point? So, I kind of went back to it, in somewhat fear, just in case, and yeah, it's kind of just the movie I remember it being. The way it's always been for the past 19 years it's been in existence now. But we'll go along into it and see what we find. Obviously, we start off with the narration where Lauren Hawley plays his ex-wife, who is telling us basically his backstory, and telling us that he's describing him as like the least politically correct guy in the universe, yet at the same time everyone finds him irresistible and all that. And what's interesting is we're getting it from this voice from the very get-go, that's like the only person besides his daughter that knows him well enough to see right through him, because we all know that he puts on the charm, but obviously he's got a bit of a misogynistic side, to say the least. Walking around his office telling jokes like, the biggest difference between a wife and a job is after 10 years the job still sucks. Stuff like that. But the interesting thing about this, though, that sometimes they introduce stuff that you think is going to be more of a big deal, and then it ends up not being. Like, we do get the backstory immediately that kind of tells us where this might come from in him, with the whole, when he was a kid, played by Logan Lerman, he was, raised by a Las Vegas showgirl, so he was always backstage with all the women, like, fawning all over him from when he was a child all the way to adulthood. And it also says that he was, like, inseparable with his mother, pretty much, which doesn't, if I recall, come back in any way whatsoever. Maybe they tried to do, like, a deep-seated thing in there, but they never really come back to it. So I guess it's basically just the showgirl thing we're supposed to go on here in regards to how he turned out this way. And sure enough, his life, we see his entire routine twice, once before the change and once after. And we see that his life is basically just one giant long line of women, whether it be his assistant, whoever that is, at his house, and then there is the woman that hails his cab at the beginning. Then he goes to his office, and there's all those people there. There's Sarah Paulson and Judy Greer and all those others, and eventually leading to Helen Hunt. There's the barista, I think, who is Marissa Tomei, and that's... it seems like a pretty clear setup. The fact that we're going to kind of get this line of women on a loop the first time around, introducing them in the second time, seeing how they really feel about him. So it's a good setup, and kind of introduces him in this way that's not just Lauren Hawley's exposition, but also kind of shows us as we see him interact with each individual woman as it goes. But we still kind of know where he comes from anyway. Even if the way he interacts may differ from woman to woman, it still kind of all comes back to the same place inside him. So, and it even gets to a point where he does this whole banter with Marissa Tomei, and he's holding up the coffee line to do this, and then when he turns around, the guy is there and like saying, can I be like you? And it's like, even the people he should be pissing off, even the people he's holding up in line, just seem, he can just charm those people that way. And this performance obviously has to come from Mel Gibson, who was obviously seen in a significantly different light in 2000 than he is now. despite his comeback anyway. But yes, it is for the most part a really funny performance, which is what has to make the whole movie work. But kind of in an interesting way, because as far as I remember, because we had learned that he could be like darkly funny in the Lethal Weapon movies, but this kind of seemed like a whole different kind of thing he was taking on at the time, at least as far as I remember. I mean, because he'd had stuff like Bird on a Wire back in the day, but I honestly don't even remember much about Bird on a Wire at all, and I think there's a reason for that. But here, you get the scene, like, obviously, the main scene you think about is the scene where he has to, you know, put on the makeup and all on the clothes and all that. And the first thing you'll notice in this scene is it's like, it is admirable, like, how committed he is to this physical comedy in this scene. And the lengths that this character goes to indeed get inside the mind of women. And he just kind of has to really just let himself go and like dive headfirst into this material, and he does it with shocking convincingly. So, and that's and the thing about this though also is that that has to also coincide with the more real moments, because he is like. He does kind of have to sell also, because as far as him being funny, I guess also goes into charming, because the thing about this movie also is if this were like a much lesser movie, or a character that the writers didn't care enough about, they would just kind of make him a shitty person, and that would be the end of it. It would, like, instead of him walking around and us saying like, oh, you know, he's able to charm everybody, and he can also be kind of funny while he's doing it. They could have just stopped it at he's a douchebag and made the audience say, oh god, he's such a douchebag, I can't wait till he gets some sort of comeuppance or learns his lesson or whatever the hell. But watching his performance, he makes it to where we can acknowledge that he's a misogynistic douchebag, but at the same time we can say, like, we understand why women would gravitate towards him. Because in another lesser movie also, not only would he be just the generic douchebag character, but they would also make the women kind of look like idiots by just sort of blindly going towards that, like almost because he's that way. But when we see him, there's enough likability there to where we understand why women are attracted to him the way they are. So they are able to do that without being like condescending to either side. So that helps a lot also. And then you eventually just get those scenes like the Sinatra dance scene before that, and it's just this whole thing just kind of oozes all this, like the sort of production design and like his apartment and the buildings and all that too kind of weirdly stands out for a movie like this. And so all of that, this is like the entire first half an hour before we finally get him being able to hear women's thoughts. It's a lengthy movie for what it is. It's got about an hour 35 to go once this happens, after it's already been on for half an hour. So that's the Nancy Meyer syndrome. She always tends to break that 2-hour mark somehow, some way, whether it calls for it or not. In this particular case, I do think that line does get crossed in a not so good way, but we'll get to that towards the end of it. So yeah, and as far as like the comedy of it holding up, there's still a charm to it, but it is one of those cases where at the same time, when you see, you know, Mel Gibson and the makeup and the women's clothing and all that, it's like, you can kind of still hear the laughter of year 2000 audiences. So it may not be like as, you know, big and funny as it was back then, but there's just, maybe honestly, seeing what we've seen from Mel Gibson up to now maybe even makes it funnier, honestly. But the thing here also is what it's going to do in regards to this concept, because for a movie this lengthy, if you kind of immediately think this concept can only go so far. So the way they handle that, like for instance, when he goes out with Marisa Tomei, they do something pretty clever, which is, I mean, honestly, not only is it clever, it kind of saves them work, too, because we don't see their date. Because you would think once they set up the date, we're going to get this comedic scene where he has to go through the whole date trying to make it, you know, seem like to her that he's not totally reading her mind. But it just immediately cuts to after the date because the real punchline of this date is coming. And if they had tried to do both the date and the sex scene, which is the real payoff to this whole Marissa Tomei subplot, they would have run out of steam like way early. They would have like completely dried up the concept, not just with the Tomei character, but really probably the whole movie. The concept would have run its course if they don't decide when they're going to show it and when they're not going to, and when to save it for the moments that really call for it, like the sex scene. So I thought that was really well handled also. And then you've got the whole inclusion of Helen Hunt, where what's interesting about their chemistry is the fact that they're able to do this thing where they don't really have a lot of chemistry at the beginning. But the thing about that is usually in these movies, when you know they're supposed to eventually have chemistry, you tend to like see a little bit in them, and then it gets more and more as they go. But I kind of like that they start off with, you know, practically none, and then as the characters sort of get in that direction, then we kind of start to see it. So it's like, it's not necessarily like, you know, like the old Cary Grant romantic comedies where they just you can immediately sense it between them. That's really not the case here, but I like the fact that they're able to find it as the characters do, and it's not there immediately, because that would have just felt... It would have felt false in a number of ways. It would have seemed awfully sudden for especially his character to feel that way, but also, like, to actually... As far as us being able to see the ending from a mile away, yes, we go in knowing they're going to fall in love, but it's like, it seems like it's kind of insulting our intelligence a little less if it doesn't seem like that's about to happen immediately and we have to wait the whole movie for it. So I thought they both handled that awfully well. Though every now and then there's a Helen Hunt scene that doesn't work. And that's mainly just like the direction of the scene. It's nothing that, like, you know, an actress could have better that Helen Hunt couldn't do. It's just the moments like when she's talking to him and then she starts to think that she's trying to not look at his dick as she's talking to him, but every time that she accidentally does, she like tries to physically turn away. And it's like, this is funny to the audience because we can hear her saying she's trying not to look at his dick, and that's why she's acting like this. But I mean, and obviously he knows that because he can hear the thoughts, but I mean, imagine he can't hear her thoughts and she just starts doing that. And she looks like an insane person. It's one of those cases where it's like, us knowing the concept kind of makes the scene sort of a bit over the top in maybe a not so good way, but for the most part they do use the concept very well, especially when it gets to times where it seems like it's going to work for him and then it doesn't. Like the scene with his daughter, where it seems like it's this really nice turning point. Where, you know, they go shopping together and he's gotten in her head and knows all the things that she really wants him to do and wants for this whole prom thing. And he's able to give her that, and there's this really nice bonding montage. And then he gets shut down because it's like, because the movie's not going to take that easy way out with this, where it's like he's been neglectful for this long, and it's like, just this day is not going to suddenly turn everything around. So it's, in another movie it would feel like it's kind of dragged out conflict, but here it does feel particularly real, especially since that they do get another nicer reconciliation scene, or maybe not nicer, but they add up together, so that they're both necessary instead of it just seeming like it's dragging the conflict out. So the main thing here that I really did want to touch on in regards to how they handled the concept, which is the most important aspect of the movie, because this is one of those things where since it's so concept heavy, that really leaves room to collapse under that pressure. So we have the idea of how many people are going to actually find out about his secret. Because obviously, you know, in comedies, good or bad, if the main character has a secret, that secret's always going to come out. It's going to be where the drama comes in. It's where the movie's going to get really boring. And we just have to wait for the climax that we know is coming. So, if I remember correctly, the only person that actually knows he can do this through the whole movie, right up to the very end, is Bette Midler. And what's interesting about this is by the time we get to this scene, it's the whole thing of, like, he's trying to explain to her that he can, And we immediately we as an audience, we might get frustrated because we think this is so easy to prove. And the scene does go there, and it doesn't waste all that much time getting there. It doesn't try to drag this out too much. And then he never has to convince anybody of this again, if I remember correctly. Because there is the lie reveal at the end, but it's telling her that he basically took her ideas and used them, and that's it. There's not some idiotic scene of him actually trying to explain to her the reason he was able to do that is because he can actually read her thoughts, because obviously in a worse movie, then she would think he was crazy, then she'd run away from him, and that would be why he'd have to get her back, and he'd have to convince her both that he's not crazy and that he's sorry that he did all that. And it just would have been an absolute mess and a total clusterfuck, which we may or may not have to talk about in a minute going forward. So yeah, and then obviously we do get the subplot towards the end. It's about an hour and 45 minutes in when the whole Judy Greer thing comes in, where he's seen her around the office a few times, and it turns out that she's suicidal. And he has to track her down. This is a very long scene, too, where he tracks her down and then goes to her house in the rain and has to convince her not to do it, and then he gives her the promotion and all that. And it's like, at the start of it, it seems really out of nowhere dark, out of nowhere dramatic, and like it's this character that we've seen maybe twice, and I get that that's the point, that she was kind of there but nobody really noticed. But I mean, they like suddenly devote a lot to this and totally change the movie's tone for it at the very last minute. In this long movie, when there's only like 15 minutes left, they decide to do this. So that's always thrown me off, but then at the same time, it does end up being what sort of brings him back, and it's, it is a nice scene when we see him bring her back to a better place, and we see that. It does kind of dismiss, because she apparently has a lot of problems, and I don't know if just, hey, you're getting promoted is going to fix all that's wrong with her, but the movie basically wants us to think that, so that's what we're going to go with. And then I would say the only problem is that the movie tends to lack because that's what I'm talking about, because you've got, the big romantic payoff where he wins over Helen Hunt and confesses that he stole her ideas and all that. And we've got the character development payoff, where he becomes a better person. He finally is able to stop hearing their thoughts, and he helps Judy Greer out, all that stuff. He's going to be, better to women now, all that. Completely changes ways. But for a movie with such a high comedic concept, there doesn't feel like much of a comedic payoff. Like, it feels like there's something missing when the thoughts just kind of stop. And it's like, so that's always kind of like, I just feel like there's like a big gap in all the different, sort of climaxes and, final endings we have before it just ends. To the point that when it does end, it feels like so abrupt. But yeah, so with that being said, I say that it's a movie that feels like it lacks like one final punch. And it's like there's maybe just one thing, sort of missing about it. So when you hear that it's basically been remade, you gotta think, okay, so what are they gonna do to improve on it? So I don't know about anybody else, but I had a certain impression of what I thought what Men Want was gonna be. And that was, remember how I said, when I heard they'd remade it and they'd switched the genders, that it was going to be like is What Women Want this, pariah in this climate now because of its concept and what it is and how it portrays, how women think, apparently. And if What Men Want was going to be like some revenge movie towards What Women Want, where it's like, oh, you think that's how the stereotypical way you think women think, well, this is going to be the stereotypical way we think, where men think. And it's like, okay, I don't know if two wrongs make a right, but It turns out that I don't think that's what Men Want's purpose was. In fact, I don't know what the fuck what Men Want's purpose is. Especially when you look at it from thinking it might have been that. It was the fact that we've got Nancy Myers making What Women Want, which makes sense. So it's like, if What Men Want was going to be that movie, you'd think a woman would be directing it too. No. What Men Want is from Adam Shankman, the enormously acclaimed director of such masterpieces as Bringing Down the House, The Pacifier, and Adam Sandler's Bedtime Stories, just to name a few. So, so I'm not really sure why they felt the need to do this, but okay. So when you, once again, you think about the reason they must be remaking What Women Want is to maybe do some sort of way to, like, stick it to that movie or whatever. That, upon revisit, doesn't really need anything particularly stuck to it. But you go in, and you think that going in, and you see that it opens, it's playing the usual romantic comedy start music, it's got, you know, Taraji on the treadmill, and she's screaming business into a phone, and she's going to her office while people follow her around and give her shit, and she gets updates from her overly stereotypical gay assistant, and it's like, okay, so is this parody? Because if it's not parody, then why does the movie exist? I don't quite understand. So it's like, okay, so what's it gonna do with the story beats of What Woman? Because obviously it's gonna change some things up a little bit. It's gonna change how it happens, and exactly, it doesn't change much what the character does. Because while they had the whole Nike thing in What Women Want, in What Men Want, it's a similar thing, but it's much more sports-oriented because they have to fill in the gaps during these really boring business scenes with athlete cameos. Because that's all they've got. So, and yeah, and as far as the way that it happens, we got the big scene in What Women Want. This big comedic scene starts off with him doing the Sinatra scene, which is great. And then him getting drunk off his ass, doing the makeup and the clothes, the run-in with his daughter, the accidentally electrocuting himself in this big, giant slapstick moment that just built and built to this moment. So how does What Men Want handle this? Well, she goes in to see the psychic in this very embarrassingly dragged-out scene of just a complete and total stupidity. Just this woman just saying random shit that's supposed to be funny, I guess because of how random it is. Then she gives her tea that's got, like, pot and ecstasy in it and whatever the hell she said. And then Taraji goes out dancing, and we get this big dancing montage that just ends with her slamming her head off a table. That's it. A dancing montage. And she just seemingly voluntarily slams her head off of a table. So then, of course, she wakes up, she can hear men's thoughts, and so on. And there are a couple of really convoluted side plots here. There's her trying to do business with Tracy Morgan. And then there's this love story with Aldous Hodge. And this, there's so many sort of miscalculations here. I'm actually going to start with the fact that, if I remember correctly, it took Gibson's character all of 2 women to figure out what was going on with him. And he didn't say anything particularly out loud. Like, he just sort of came to the conclusion, and he's like, you know, is this real? You know, what the hell is going on? And then he kind of figures it out. Taraji's method is to go around just responding to them and just saying all this, responding to their thoughts just blatantly. And the first Doctor somewhat makes sense, because it kind of builds up like maybe he thought he said it out loud when he didn't mean to. But this goes on and on and on of her just totally and completely outing this, and people just sort of, you know, and then it gets to a point where she is so in denial of this. Like, they drag it out so much of just not cutting to the chase and having her just accept this is what the concept is and letting the movie continue, her assistant, she starts to read his mind, and she goes off on him for talking without moving his lips, and why is he doing that? And she's already encountered like 5 dudes already whose thoughts she's been hearing. And by the time she gets to this point, she's saying, oh, it's just you talking without moving your mouth. And it's like, why are you dragging this out? Just have her fucking figure it out and move on. It worked for Mel Gibson, so I don't know. And then that's the thing also, is I was talking about the concept and how if they had shown that Marissa Tomei date, the movie was going to probably run its course and run out of things to do with the concept early if they overused it. So I was worried about them running out of the concept before this movie was over. So what good can possibly come from making an entirely new movie with the same concept that's almost the same length? This one about reaches 2 hours. So it falls maybe like a couple minutes short. So whatever that tells you about how much they don't have to work with by the time this happens. And so we do get, every now and then, there's a moment that's like, that's kind of a clever use of the concept. Like, when she goes to a poker game and uses that to her advantage. And it's like, okay, that works. That's a way to use the concept that this movie didn't. And that's about the end of the compliments. That's about all I can give it. Because this is one of those cases where there's a side character played by Kellen Lutz, and the only purpose this person serves is to be like a sexual fantasy of hers. So and they're always riding in the elevator together. And of course, she reads his mind, and he's saying like, oh, you know, we've never talked, but she's so hot, I wish she'd just throw me up against the walls and fuck me in this elevator and all that. Well, here's the problem with the payoff of this joke, is, especially given the concept, I would think, and maybe, you know, I'm wrong here, maybe this is just me, but the funny payoff to me would have been that he says in his mind, oh, even though she's a stranger, I want her to just throw me up against the walls and just take me. And she does that. Like, in the movie, she does that. Now, to me, a payoff would have been if it's like, you know, sometimes, like, you might have certain fantasies in your head, but then, should those things actually happen, they'd probably freak you out more than anything else. Like, if it was in his mind, he was saying, oh, I wish she'd shove me up against the walls and just, you know, fuck me right here. And when she starts to do that, if his mind changes and he's like, oh, this is a lot weirder than I thought it was, this is actually, she's actually insane to actually do this, and now I've completely changed my mind. But no, they don't take that route. They want to take full advantage of the fact that what women want was PG-13, and this movie is rated R. So, as many sex scenes as humanly possible. Actually, not that many. They're just dragged out beyond any possible runtime. So this payoff instead is that she goes to Kellen Lutz's place, and nothing particularly clever, nothing particularly creative, just a sort of 50 Shades type reference, where she walks into a red room and he's got a gimp mask on and he's in chains and shit, and she's like, oh, this is more than I bargained for, and runs. And it's like, wouldn't it have been a lot, would it just not been a lot funnier if it was him that got too much more than he bargained for? But nope, gotta make it a sex movie, I guess, so that's still relevant. And that's the problem too, is it's like, if this were pre-50 Shades, it might be its own joke, but post-50 Shades, you know they're basically just making a reference to that, as opposed to just, you know, the whole S&M thing itself. So, whatever. And then we get jokes that are just the usual dragged-out bullshit you see in all the bad comedies. Like, the first time we see Pete Davidson, he's on the phone yelling at somebody. That old joke where we know it's going to be some family member or something. But the way they drag it out this time is, he's yelling at the guy on the phone, and he says, I'm gonna fuck your mom. And then when he hangs up, they're like, who is that? And he's like, oh, my brother. And it's like, okay, there's a joke there. and it lands nice enough. Like, Davidson delivered it and well enough. But you just have to have the assistant that hangs around and says, "So that was your brother on the phone, and you told your brother that?" And it's, well, say good fucking bye to the small joke that you had, and yeah, and just shit like that. There's that whole thing, and then like I said, just throughout the rest of the movie, it's basically just her continuously outing her secret, just sort of not even remotely trying to hide this, and then there's nothing for the characters to play on, because, like, what can they say? But the movie doesn't even try to do anything with that either. The jokes throughout the movie are, we hear their thoughts, she says their thoughts back to them, and they go, "What? How did you know that?" End scene. Just over and over and over and over again. And I guess the reaction of them, that's what the punchlines are. I don't know. So, remember how I said one of the biggest compliments I could pay what women want was that we don't have the stupid scene where he actually has some big confession. Where he actually tries to convince people, I can read people's minds. Well, you better believe Taraji finds herself in front of a big, big crowd at the most inappropriate time and screams to the heavens her secret. So we do get that scene after all. It's like the whole point of what women want was that it avoided scenes like this. And what men want is like, you know what women want was missing? The shit that they danced around that needed to not be in that movie. And that's what I think makes that movie so appealing, is it doesn't have this bullshit. And they were like, you know what? It wasn't generic enough. We need that bullshit. And we need it bad. So, there it is. All the shit that you were glad wasn't in What Women Want, well, somebody found it. They took the nice little missing holes where bullshit usually is that was missing from What Women Want, and they were like, let's make a script out of these. Like, let's just write around it and use the same concept and everything. Just put, a bunch of fucks in it and a bunch of sex jokes in it, and voila, we have an adult movie. Apparently adult movies are for 15-year-olds now, I guess. Thank you, Ryan Reynolds. So, the biggest problem also is not just that, but how I said that even though Gibson's character was a piece of shit, there was still something sort of likable about him. We could understand how he was in the position that he was. And his performance made it pretty believable when he changed as a person. More or less. So, Taraji, dare I say, is an even bigger piece of shit than he is. Because I was talking about that romantic subplot with Aldous Hodge. Well, here's the thing, is, number one, this guy gets put through the fucking ringer through the whole movie. So, there is no woman in What Women Want that is treated as such like shit as Aldous Hodge is in this movie. And that's what makes Taraji's character so unforgivable, because Gibson stole Helen Hunt's ideas, but it didn't matter because we knew he was going to fall in love with her and confess anyway. Taraji, on the other hand, has a one-night stand with this dude, and then doesn't let him explain that his wife is dead. So she yells at him for being married, and runs out on him, and basically sees him as the scum of the earth. Because his wife is dead. Now, she may not... I mean, the fact that she doesn't know that, there's only so far we can hold this against her. However, once things are revealed about him, and the truth is revealed about him, and how hard of a life he's kind of having at the moment, and doesn't need people acting like that towards him, especially after a one-night stand, it turns out that her boss is not going to respect her and give her the job that she wants because she's not married. So, with this guy's complete and total lack of knowledge of this, she tells everybody that that guy is her husband. So she spends the rest of the movie using him to get that job that she wants. Totally without his knowledge whatsoever. Uh, and she seems totally and completely remorseless about this. Like with Gibson, yeah, he's like real, high on himself about how great this is. He can use his power to take Helen Hunt's ideas and get all the credit and stuff like that. But I mean, this is a guy that's in such an emotionally vulnerable spot as it is. Because his wife has just died and he's a single parent just trying to make it. And she's like, this is the perfect candidate to use to get the job that I want. And I won't show any sort of remorse or any sort of humanity until I get caught. Like, not even the slightest. And it's only when she gets caught to where it's like, oh no, what have I done? I'm a terrible person. And it's like, will you take me back? And you know how the fucking thing ends. So that's... And yeah, so it's only when it gets to that point, and it's like, by that point, there was enough in Gibson's character, particularly with the daughter subplot, where, like, when it came around, like, we kind of wanted him to turn around, because we wanted him to have a good relationship with his daughter, we wanted him to get with Helen Hunt, we wanted him to be successful at his job, even if he's probably going to get fired. And yeah, so he receives, a comeuppance to an extent. We don't necessarily see this, but it's pretty implied that he'll get a little bit of both. But the fact that we like it that he comes around. I didn't give the slightest fuck where Taraji ended up, because the movie only wants us to care about it at the very last minute, when it gets to the sad portion of the movie, when everybody calls her out on her bullshit. And it's like, why would we ever want her to not only get everything she wants, but that she gets that dude too, who's been through all that horrible shit that she just made so much worse. Why are we supposed to want that for anybody in this movie? I don't get it. So that's pretty much what that is. So not only did it not in any way try to expand on this movie, or maybe right some wrongs it may have had that it didn't already do itself by the time it got to the end, what is the purpose of this? Nobody wins with this movie existing. So, except that, Taraji, I guess, probably made some money. I haven't looked at the box office for it, but I'm assuming it's done decently, at least. So, congratulations, Taraji, but maybe after this and Proud Mary, I'm all for her being, getting all these lead roles, but, she should really do a bit more of a sort of quality check on these scripts before this happens, but I don't know. I don't know who saw appeal in this, but whatever. So needless to say, there's really nothing here that What Women Want doesn't do significantly better. So there's really no reason for it to even exist, so there's no reason to even say, which of these did it better. I think that's pretty clear. I think that was probably always going to be clear, but like I said, some people may roll their eyes at the thought of, maybe it being some sort of answer to, not just this movie, but like, sort of, misogynistic romantic comedies of the past. But no. Not even close. This movie has nothing to say about anything, except screaming to the heavens, I am a total and complete piece of shit. So, that's the end of this. So as I said, the next video is going to be like a whole bunch of movies from this year and the past couple of months, a few Netflix movies, all that. And then going into another Versus, hopefully by the time we get to the Captain Marvel thing. I saw Greta earlier today, so I'll talk about Greta with Captain Marvel, and then we'll go from there. And hopefully we'll be sorted out and back to normal by then, or at least close to it. So, yes. So with all that in mind, I think that's